It's such an important part of our practice as educators to assess formatively throughout the learning and the teaching. Every moment, every day is what Black and Willem talk about in their seminal research from 1998. And the idea is that assessment practice of looking at how your learners are doing informs both teaching in terms of what it is that we as teachers can do to alter, adjust, better meet the needs of our learners as we look at the learning and reflect on it, and also that our learners have that descriptive feedback, have clear learning intentions, success criteria, ownership of their own learning that then feeds forward their learning so that they can grow in identifying what those next steps are for their learning journey.
One area that has very powerful and very useful tools and techniques for engaging the kind of student-centered assessment that we would like to practice comes from the field of culturally responsive, culturally relevant, and culturally sustaining pedagogies. Briefly, this body of knowledge looks at the cultural experiences of the young people, their families, their communities, and considers not only how we can incorporate those cultural practices into our classroom for authentic learning and authentic experience, but also how our teaching can value, uplift, and celebrate those cultural practices. There are many ways that this cultural practice can be incorporated into the classroom. When we think about culturally relevant and culturally sustaining assessment, one of the things that we always want to attend to is considering what the needs of the young person are from the perspective of their cultural practice and their cultural influences. So what are the ways that as curriculum builders, as pedagogy scholars, can we create these experiences for young people that recognize their cultural practice, that celebrate their cultural practice, and do so in a way that truly enlivens a sense of joy and not as an act of appropriation. It's a very challenging line sometimes to walk, but one that I think all educators do in some form. And so the ways that we can develop our capacities for doing this more and doing it better, I think is well worth our time and energy.
How do I move from this language of percentages and grades and measurement to this idea of uplifting students to understand who they are as learners and measure that growth and progress along the way, starting from where students are at? And how do we come in alongside teachers, not to tell teachers what they're doing wrong or to point out their areas of growth, but rather keeping students at the center. Who are our students? How can we be responsive to them? Who are our Indigenous students? Who are our students with designation? Who are our voices on the margin that aren't labeled? But yet the environment needs to be a place that is inclusive and culturally responsive to them.
With young students, when you think about assessment, there's not really necessarily a beginning point or an ending point because all of the students are starting with a different kind of skill. And so they're coming to the learning environment at different places. And when they leave your learning environment after the kindergarten year, they will all also still be at different places. So formative assessment is much more appropriate for this age group because you want to meet them where they're at with your feedback and give them that feedback that they need, sort of that just-in-time feedback. That feedback that's happening in the moment, and you want to preload them with your expectations before you begin an activity. So if you're doing an activity and you have a certain expectation of what it should look like or what it could look like, you would want to preload it kind of just before you begin. And when you're actually in the activity, you want to reuse that language with the students as you're working with them.
But Edward, is it true? Do you think it's true?
Some of the most significant theory and research related to assessment really helps us think about an equity stance, that all learners deserve to know what we're focusing on and that we need to make that focus explicit.
I've started working towards identifying skills, that's kind of the highlight, and the curricular competencies that I want to utilize or develop. And I kind of work my way both sides of that. So I'll kind of come back to how could I start this? what do I want the processes of learning to be, and then essentially what do I want the outcome to be. But what I've started doing is holding back from what I want the outcome to be and trying to let the students guide that. So voice and choice is really something I am hopeful for. I think I try really hard to develop the skills with them along the way, and then if we're talking about the outcome or the product that they're producing, I'll give them some ideas, because I do find that our learners that are more analytical, or if we have students on the spectrum, they struggle with creating something entirely on their own. So I like to do a little bit of both. So I'll kind of give them some examples or some options, and then we might brainstorm for other areas. Where I've found I've been most proud of my students is when I don't give them everything, because they are very creative and they can come up with ultimately what they want to make to demonstrate their learning. So I would say that's where they have choice.
So my criteria is very dynamic. It develops individually quite a lot throughout the year. I'm actively conferencing with my kids from September to now in January. And so each student has different skills and curricular competencies that they focus on. And I try to check in with them as much as I can. Sometimes I'm setting the goals for them, and sometimes they're setting the goals for me.
Obviously, I start with the curriculum and what are the important essential things for grade 6 that we need to talk about. And then get to know the kids and see where they're at and see if that makes sense for their next step to be that, or if there's other pieces missing in between. So kind of starting with the curriculum and then really getting to know the kids to set the intentions. And then at the beginning, that's definitely more led by me, the teacher. And then as the year goes on, it is definitely more co-created with the kids. And those learning intentions sometimes become more obvious as the year goes on, as I get to know them.
I do try to give the kids a chance to build the criteria with me sometimes, or at the very least we go through the criteria. I say, this is what the criteria or the evaluation looked like last year, but we're a new class. Do you see anything that doesn't quite fit what we're trying to accomplish? And it's amazing. The kids will sometimes notice something in an old evaluation rubric I've used or something, or just in the competencies we're covering that we need to add or take out. It is a time-consuming thing, but I think it is worth it. And at the very least, I think, yeah, just giving them a chance to see the intentions and the expectations ahead of time is big.
Being explicit with kids in middle years is so important, because they are very much questioning why things are happening. And if you don't tell them the why, then you get no buy-in. They need to know exactly what you're doing and why. And then they will buy in, then they will participate. If they feel like there's no reason to do something, then they are not going to do it. They're going to be very resistant.
I start with backwards design, where we move from a big place. So we start at the core competencies, we go lower in the triangle, we go to the big ideas and the curricular competencies, go into the content, and in that way we can use what I would like as a teacher intention, put it out there. But we've gone from big idea to small in terms of like what I'm looking for, what I'm collecting, what I want students to be able to achieve, in that we can synthesize all of that into eventual I can statements that kids can interpret, kids can really make it meaningful. And then I find that goes really well with continual formative assessment, where to be able to have a reflexive practice with the children, right? You don't know how they're going to interpret things. So in some ways, my intention of I want students to be able to achieve this by the end of this lesson or this chunk of lessons, using formative assessment to go back and be reflexive, reflect on that as a team, what can we improve? It might change the learning intentions. So I find that being responsive is also key in terms of coming up with those intentions, and they just continually develop as you get to know the kids, as you know your practice, and as the time continues in the class.
A critical part about formative assessment is that it's not a destination. It's just embedded in our practice. It's what we do every day. It's what we do every minute. And yet, the necessity for being intentional around how it is that we're going to gauge how our learners are doing to inform both student learning and our own practice is critical. So is it a think, pair, share? Is it partner talk? Is it looking at students in small groups and listening to conversations? Is it an exit slip or a post-it that they are doing as they reflect on their learning? A quadrant where they're doing some drawing or some consideration of their path? Are there learning goals that they're setting for that particular lesson or unit that then they reflect on? So all of those things are those intentional acts that we as teachers put into our planning so that we're organizing for learning in ways that are really strength-based, that really build on the capacity of each one of the learners in our classroom.
Over the last several decades, research in the area of assessment has moved us away from a focus on summative assessment to attending to ongoing formative assessment. Really this notion that learning and assessment are integrated, and when we engage in cycles of noticing and reflecting and adjusting our learning and our teaching, it makes a significant difference in both the outcomes for the learners, but also the engagement of learners.